Welcome to the Faith in Action podcast, where we aim not only to highlight the successes, the challenges, and the needs within our community, but also to embody the change that we wish to see. The Faith in Action name comes from James 2:20, which says, "How foolish. Can't you see that faith without good deeds is useless?" In essence, this verse is speaking to the fact that our good deeds don't save us or make us right with God, but they are evidence that we belong to Jesus. I'm your host, Roemon, and today we have a special guest on our first episode of this podcast. His name is Jesse Brunette, and he is the executive director of St. John's Ministries here in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Jesse, would you introduce yourself to the people and tell them what your role is with St. John's?
Thank you. Thank you, Roemon, and thank you to Highland Crest Baptist Church for allowing this opportunity to speak about St. John's Ministries. I've been the executive director for about 5 months and on staff there for about a year. I started in the community engagement team, working specifically with church and faith groups, trying to build partnerships and serving the homeless population here in the Green Bay community. So I love what I do every day. And the issue of homelessness is a community problem and something we all need to work together to help resolve.
Awesome. Well, Jesse, thank you so much for letting us know a little bit about who you are and what your role is. So I have a few questions for you today. Previously, brother, we discussed 3 levels of homelessness, I believe. I forgot exactly what you call each of those levels, but you said there were different levels of homelessness within our community. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, St. John's Ministries has been in existence for about 19 seasons. And through the years, the homeless population in the Green Bay community has changed. And the numbers have greatly increased from 20 years ago. The 3 areas of our strategic plan that deals with the working with the homeless population are chronic homelessness, housing instability, and situational homelessness. So chronic homelessness, those are individuals who have been habitually homeless, perhaps for over a year. There usually is some sort of diagnosis that accompanies their state of homelessness. Situational homeless would be someone who, has been evicted from their apartment, or maybe they lost their job and they're in need of shelter for a very short period of time. And then the housing instability, those would be folks who are currently housed, have good options, but they are in jeopardy of losing their housing. So we work with those 3 population groups: chronically homeless, situationally homeless, and the housing unstable.
As I listen to you talk about that, what would you say is the most prevalent of those 3 categories of homeless?
From a resource allocation, it would be the chronically homeless population. Within our community and throughout the country, if you've listened to the news or maybe had conversations with people within your peer group or community, there just are not enough places for a person to live right now. The housing is through the roof expensive. And then the housing that is available, there could be 5, 10, 30 people applying for a single apartment. That pressure on the housing market has not given many people many choices to attain housing. And so right now that chronic population has grown locally and nationally. So that is the area that we're seeing a lot of resources go. However, we don't want to lose our attention or shift too much of our attention from the situationally homeless. So as people are experiencing short-term homelessness, they need to have a connection to our case managers so we can help them get into housing options, whether that be an apartment, housing development, moving in with a family member, connecting with a friend who has an apartment that they could be added to the lease. So there are a lot of different ways that we're working with the population. So we would love it so that all of our attention wouldn't go primarily on the chronically homeless population. However, the crisis that we're experiencing, we see more and more of our time going towards that population.
Before we spoke, I had no idea of those categories or how challenging that might be. We talked about mental illness. How prevalent is mental illness among the homeless, and how does St. John's address that?
Yeah, I think within the greater context, our culture in general, I think we have seen a significant impacts the mental health through COVID and since.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people who have suffered depression, social isolation, disconnection from peers and family. And I think that has been just a trend that we have seen, and how that has impacted those who are experiencing homelessness, I would say greatly, because not only are we dealing with some of the same mental health issues that the general population is facing, there is also a deterioration of the social fabric in regards to where do people go who do have mental health struggles? Are there institutional facilities available to them? Not as much as there used to be. And so, in this greater context of our society, and down to the level of the guests that we serve, we're seeing more instances of mental illness, and I would say untreated or undiagnosed mental illness is high. We ask our guests to self-report their barriers towards housing, and 42% of our guests self-report mental health as a struggle they're overcoming, and about 22% are self-reporting AODA, which is alcohol and other substance addictions. So between mental health and substance abuse, about 60% of our guests are self-reporting one or two of those. And dare I kind of guess that that would probably be higher, but we go off the data of being self-reported.
When I think about mental illness, that's something that hits home for me personally, because my mom struggles with mental illness, and not in Green Bay, but at one time she lived in the street in Chicago and struggled with that. And so just to know that there's someone out there trying to address that need is so awesome. Thank you so much for letting us know about that. We talked too about some of the challenges that you face within the ministry, and also some of the successes and things that you're excited about. Could you share with us a little bit of both? So maybe one success story and maybe one that that was really challenging, and how you guys did that.
Yeah. So the mission of St. John's Ministries is to honor the dignity, restore hope, and create lasting change. So that is how we view the work that we do. Treat people with dignity. Sometimes with the population that experiences homelessness, they're not always treated well by society in general within their community. And if we view them as a child of God, that they're worthy of dignity, and setting that foundation from the very beginning of their time in shelter and in our daytime resource centers, I think that establishes a very good foundation for the work that we do. And with that dignity, with that hope that we're trying to reach them with, we do experience a lot of successes. There are growing numbers of those experiencing homelessness, and we never want our work to just be simply dealing with numbers. We're dealing with people, we're dealing with living souls. And so when we're able to take a guest who is homeless and transition them or work with them through case management to housing, that's a success.
Yes.
And I'll share her name because she's allowed this story public to be addressed publicly. But Mary's a woman who experienced homelessness for the first time in her 70s. So she started in shelter with us a year ago. She got through the end of the shelter season, and then we have a summer safe sleep program. So she stayed with us during some of the summer months, and then applied for housing, applied for apartments, worked with our case management, and finally she got out an apartment. And so she now is out of shelter in her own housing, independent. However, for us, we know that when a person goes from shelter to housing, the story doesn't end there.
Right.
And so sometimes when people have no social connection or disconnected from family, loved ones, maybe they're at an age where a lot of their family no longer is living. So we had a volunteer, Linda, wonderful lady, who took Mary, personally involved herself in Mary's story, and served Mary, and was able to help furnish the apartment and check in with her regularly. And so those are all things that we're very excited to have happen, positive things. A disappointment, I would say, is just the high numbers. Nothing specific, but last shelter season was our busiest shelter season. We sheltered 605 individuals. Wow. This year, we're recording this at the end of February. We're about 2/3 of our way through the shelter season. And this year we're sheltering nearly 500. Wow. So only, 60 some percent of our way through the shelter season, and we're sheltering, nearly 500 people, whereas last year was just 600.
Right.
So the higher numbers of those experiencing homelessness, I would say that that's a disappointment, but it's something that we're working to face and encounter. I mean, if we didn't exist, those people would be living on the streets. So
Right.
we welcome them into our shelter facilities and work with them to get out of their situation towards housing. So there are more successes than disappointments.
That's great.
God is good, and as long
Yes.
as we ask for His guidance in what we do, and He loves His people more than we ever could. And so, with
That's
God's help, we're going to keep doing the work that we're doing.
Thank you so much, Jesse. When you answered that question, you mentioned something about a safe sleep program. Could
Yeah.
you explain a little bit what that is?
Yeah, so St. John's Ministries, we have a men's shelter and a women's shelter, and we consider ourselves a shelter of last resort, and we are set up to the 6 months of the year that are the coldest. So
Okay.
from November 1st until April 30th, that
Okay.
is our shelter season. However, we know that because summer arrives, May 1st is here, that doesn't mean that homelessness just
Exactly.
disappears. And so every shelter season presents its own challenges, and every off season presents its own challenges, but also opportunities. And so for the last several seasons, we have run a program called Summer Safe Sleep. So for a very certain number, because we don't have full capacity, we have limitations in staffing and resources, but there are certain people within our population that need additional shelter as they straighten out their situation,
Gotcha.
as they wait for an apartment to be available, as they work through a chronic health issue. So we run a very streamlined summer safe sleep program, and that allows a certain number of our guests in a very specific harm reduction shelter. So they basically come in at 9 at night, sleep on mats on the floor, and then leave 6 in the morning.
Okay.
And so that is something that we are kind of discerning whether that is the best approach this coming summer month, 2 months from now. So we have to decide, but we are a year-round provider of services. So we may be sheltering most of our guests half
Mhm.
of the year, but that doesn't mean that May 1st is here, we just disengage.
That's great.
We're going out to reach people. We're daytime resource centers available, 2 of them, and then we're going to probably expand the hours of those daytime resources. We're going to do some different innovative things to help people move forward in life.
Wow. You guys are never stopping with ministry. It sounds like
Yeah.
there's always plenty to do. And I've recently been looking at Matthew, and that makes me think about when Jesus said that the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. So, Jesse, what services does St. John offer?
As I mentioned, we're a year-long provider of resources,
Mhm.
and we have 4 facilities. We have a men's shelter and a women's shelter. There, we shelter people for 6 months out of the year. And then we have the Micah Center and we have Wellspring. The
Okay.
Micah Center is a co-ed facility that is a year-long daytime resource center.
Okay.
Wellspring is right next to our women's shelter. There is a place for women who are socially isolated or disconnected to
Okay.
go every day, Monday
Gotcha.
through Friday, for a sense of community and support. And so at the shelter, we provide shower services. We provide a warm meal every single night. At the men's shelter and the women's shelter, we provide case management at the shelters as well as the daytime resource centers. Daytime resource centers, we provide classes and workshops. Brown County Public Health Department did vaccinations for flus at our shelter, computer labs, job training, faith-based job placement services, counseling. So with this population, we're looking at multiple different ways to reach them, to go from homelessness to housing, everything that you can think of in between we've done, and we're going to keep looking for ways to do things, do advanced things, because every year the population kind of shifts and some new challenges present. Maybe this year with cost of housing the way it is, maybe we look
Yes.
at building partnerships with providers, or maybe looking for some sorts of funding to help people get apartments or put down a security deposit.
Yeah.
So we are just a hive of activity
That's
year round.
awesome.
Even though we shelter people 6 months out of the year, we are active and dedicated to doing year-long programming.
That's great. Well, Jesse, you kind of already spoke to this a little bit when you talked about the different services that you offer. Could you tell us about the different locations and where they are within
Yeah.
the city of Green Bay and kind of what the function is again of each of those locations?
Yeah, our locations really is a story of growth.
Okay.
And so 20 years ago, when more people experiencing homelessness were recognized and churches in the community got together and tried to find a way to house them or shelter them. And so 20 years ago or so, the priest of St. John the Evangelist Catholic Church in school had a gymnasium that was available at a former school. And that's how we began.
Oh,
Literally mats on the floor during the winter
Wow.
months. We didn't want people freezing on the streets in Green Bay.
Humble beginnings.
Yeah, that's for sure. And that's always one of the best ways to start, quite
right.
honestly. And so that's exactly how it began. And then through the years, not only were we sheltering people during the cold weather months, then the question was, well, what did they do during the day?
Right.
So then we opened the Micah Center, also downtown. Micah Center originally was located on Walnut Street.
Okay.
But then during COVID, we realized that due to social distancing, we needed an additional shelter space. So we leased space at a building downtown. And so we were sheltering the men at one shelter and the women at one of our leased facilities.
Okay.
And through COVID, we realized that was a very good thing to do, obviously, for obvious reasons. But in addition to that, the men and the women were better off sheltered amongst their own genders. And so the women did very well. A lot of the women that we serve are maybe victims of domestic violence, abuse.
That makes sense.
Maybe some bad relationship history. And for them to be in a shelter with women also experiencing similar situation, it helped.
Right.
It helped them more. So then we decided that we needed a women's shelter. And so that was another location. And then the fourth location is Wellspring, which I mentioned earlier.
Okay.
So all four facilities, the men's shelter, still at St. John the Evangelist Catholic Church, the women's shelter, which is now on Walnut Street,
Okay.
Wellspring, which is next door to our women's shelter, also on Walnut Street, and then the Micah Center, which is our daytime resource center that's open year round. That's on Stewart and Monroe.
Awesome.
So one thing I'll say, and I should clarify too, with our connection to the Catholic Church, our roots really, started in the church. However, about 4 years ago, as we kept growing and trying to pull in more resources and more partnerships with our Christian faith partners, we became an ecumenical outreach.
Okay.
And so the St. John's Ministries, at one point it was St. John the Evangelist Homeless Shelter, which many people may be familiar with that. A couple of years ago, we rebranded to St. John's Ministries.
Okay.
And I think St. John's Ministries evokes more of our ecumenical outreach, as well as the multiple different ways that we're serving the population. So I view us as director as a ministry first.
Okay.
Ministry means you care for people, and that means in a lot of different ways. So it's not necessarily just shelter services, it's all those other things. And how do we infuse faith? How do we ask for God's guidance in all that we do? And that's kind of the direction we're going to keep deepening that path.
And for the people who might not know what ecumenical means, he's basically saying that all people are welcome. So they're not saying if you're not a Catholic, you can't come and help out at St. John's. If you're a Baptist, you can't come and help. Anybody who wants to help the homeless are more than welcome to join in. As we stated in the beginning, that the goal for this podcast is to highlight the challenges, successes, and opportunities within our community to serve. And so with that in mind, Jesse, how can people who are watching this and thinking, man, I really want to jump in and get my hands dirty and help out, what can they do as individuals or as a church body?
Roemon has been very helpful in this. Highland Crest did do some park outreach this last summer, and it was a wonderful ministry opportunity, haircuts, clothing, food. It was everything. And so those are always opportunities to partner with us, because one thing that I have learned with those who are experiencing homelessness is that I think there still is a social stigma there. And some people maybe are not comfortable or familiar enough to kind of start that outreach. And St. John's Ministries, in my opinion, is a safe place for Highland Crest to come and to kind of build that build that foundation, build that understanding.
Yeah.
It could be something as simple as having the church or a family within the church to serve a meal at the shelter.
Okay.
So at the men's shelter, we're averaging anywhere from 90 to 110 men per night.
Wow.
And so we serve a meal every single night, and that comes from the community. We don't have the resources to pay for meals on our own. So a lot of times a church group or faith group, men's ministry, women's ministry, whatever it is, they'll prepare the meal offsite and then they'll come to the shelter and then they'll serve it. So if you don't have the budget to feed 90 to 110 hungry men, maybe you can do like 30 to 40 hungry women. And so with the women's shelter, we have less women who get sheltered there versus the male population. So that's a good opportunity as well.
And if they wanted to do that while we're there with the food, how would they go about doing that? Through your website, or would they contact you directly?
You can go on our website, stjohnsgreenbay.org. We have a volunteer page there, and then we have a meal train website. So I'll link to meal train so you can look to see what dates are available for the women's shelter, what dates are available for the men's shelter. You can sign up there. And Brooke Graham is our volunteer coordinator. She is phenomenal. On that page, there's a lot of those questions that we can't get into in a podcast, but what to bring, how much should we bring? Should we bring utensils? Those sorts of things.
So all the details are covered through that website.
Yeah, that's definitely. Great. So meals, that's a huge need, as well as just volunteering, hospitality. Can you come in? Work the front desk at one of our resource centers. If there's people in the church that are kind of moved to do some sort of Bible study, those are always welcome opportunities to engage. Seasonal shift work. When we run 2 shelters, we have to go from 4 in the evening until 8:30 in the morning, and that requires a seasonal staff. So if there are members of Highland Crest that are interested in picking up some shelter shifts, even if it's 10 hours a week, a shift here and there, particularly the overnight shifts, those are always harder to fill. I think
it's like trying to fill the daycare at the church.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, as there's always, as you said, you referenced it earlier, many ends.
That's right.
God kind of calls us to this, and so with the issues of the homeless population, we got to reduce the stigma. And I know at different times it can be very intimidating,
right?
But they're just like us, brothers and sisters. Maybe some have experienced things that we have not experienced here in the area. However, we're all about familiarity and rapport. Come have conversations, kind of break down those barriers, because a lot of the people who find themselves homeless just simply don't have that foundation of faith, that foundation of family. Maybe they don't have a support system. They don't know who to turn to. And the more that we can kind of humanize the issue and break down those barriers, we can continue to move people forward towards lasting change. We want everyone to do well, but I think people through their circumstances and experiences, they are in their current situation.
Right.
And so if a person of faith and goodwill is interested in engaging and partnering with St. John's Ministries, we have a whole list of volunteer opportunities, something as simple as an hour or two a week to something as serious as picking up shelter shifts. We'd love to have you.
That's great. That's great. So sounds like there's a ton of different ways to get involved. And if I'm hearing you correctly, you can pretty much do all of that through the website.
Yeah, through the website. Yeah, stjohnsgreenbay.org. People can reach out to me directly as director. I welcome those conversations as well.
Well, brother, it's been such a good time talking to you about all of the different ways that people can get involved with St. John's Ministry. The things that you guys are doing in the community is just incredible. I'm really encouraged by what you guys are doing at St. John's. And I hope as you're watching this that you're thinking, man, how can I get my hands dirty? How can I get involved with that ministry? I would encourage you to go to the website. I would encourage you to contact Jesse, because he loves to talk. He'll love to sit down and have a conversation with you, just like he did with myself and Pastor Chad. With that being said, this is the first episode of the Faith in Action podcast, and I am blessed that you were my first guest.
I love it.
It's just been fun, brother. If you're watching, I'm going to ask you to like, subscribe, and share, and do all the other stuff that all the other podcast people tell you to do. I need you to do that too, because we want to get this out, and we want people to know how they can serve in Green Bay and maybe even abroad at sometimes. We don't want to just box this in and say that it's just this one thing. We may cover many different topics within this podcast, but today it's been a blessing to learn how we can be a blessing to the homeless people in our community. Thank you, Jesse.
Yeah, thank you, Roemon. I appreciate it. Thank you.